everyone. It's time for our next panel. It is called Clean Transition for and Through Culture. At the Festival of the New European Bauhaus, communities, creators and changemakers come together to shape a more sustainable, inclusive and vibrant future through creativity and innovative ideas. I'm just going to wait for you to settle down just a moment so I can properly announce our next panel. If everyone can please sit down and have some attention here on the stage. Merci beaucoup, très bien. As said, at the festival, we are here to change and to make change in a very sustainable and impactful way. But also a festival itself, like this, runs the risk of having a big impact itself. Bands, for instance, touring with concerts, film shootings, all of that can have a strong carbon footprint. And there's a growing awareness and also a need for cultural and creative sectors to go greener and embed sustainability in their own practices. Yet, on the other hand, culture, creativity and the arts have a critical role to play in enabling, let's say, the mindset shifts that are necessary for a fair and inclusive climate transition. That is what this panel will address. So please welcome your moderator, curator and co-director at FAST, the Archipelago of Possible Future, José Luis de Vicente. A huge round of applause.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us again. I've learned this morning to talk over the music because yesterday I let it roll and roll. It was going on forever. And I had a crowd looking at me. It was super scary. So day two, we're doing better. We're trying to understand better how this goes. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to continue this conversation that in a way we started yesterday. I have given really the privilege to run a couple of conversations around, in the end, the transformative power of culture, and how culture is one of the driving forces for this transition. And it is very much in the heart of what the New European Bauhaus is. In essence, the idea that the transition is not only a political problem, it's definitely not a technological problem, it is also a cultural problem, and that culture will be central for driving this transition towards a new world, to a post-carbon world. But we have to talk about culture in all of its dimensions, from how it can shift minds, but also how it also needs to remake itself, how it actually needs to teach by example. And in this transition, culture can be a way of changing minds, but also it has to preach with the example. It has actually to transform itself radically as a very important economic sector. CCI, culture and creative industries, also have to do a big transition. So to talk about how culture can shift minds, but also culture can become a leading force in this transition. We have 4 great panelists today, 4 voices from different contexts who are going to help us to set the scenario. Please join me, Arminia, Joris, Sven, and Stel on stage. Oh my God. I like to see this energy, maybe because it's Friday. Erminia, hello. Thanks for joining us for this session. Thanks so much. Erminia Esquiciato, she's the co-chair of the EU Open Method of Coordination, which is a group of the 42 member states experts on stimulating the green transition of the cultural and creative sectors. And she has been behind a massive report, like a huge titanic effort called Creative Shifts, Empowering Culture for Sustainable Living, which basically, here it is. I hope you have already read it and you have your notes with you. That is kind of like, I feel like a Bible or a roadmap or a decalogue towards how achieving this process. Like what is actually what the cultural sector has to do, how can it transform, and where are we and where should we be headed? Erminia, thanks so much. Give us the basics.
Well, of course, it's a huge task. Just to give you a snapshot, an overview of what is contained in this fantastic report that I invite you to read, download, and of course there are a few copies in the room. But so I will just tell you what is the story behind the report? Well, first of all, 42 experts, and this is the first important element, from the Ministries of Environment, Climate and Culture, work together from 22 member states in the framework of the major framework for cooperation at European level, which is the Work Plan for Culture under the European Agenda for Culture, to address exactly this issue. And I think that we were all, since the very first meeting, we were all bound by the same commitment towards the urgency to transform what is the practice that we are seeing evolving, the transformation, an ongoing transformation, ongoing shift into systemic change. What we should do to change and to enable a systemic transformation. So the group has identified 6 key factors. Just to put things in order, we have screened the ongoing shift in all the member states, collected several examples. 107 responded and 31 policymakers replied. So there was also important, massive participation from the ground, and also contribution from several directorate generals of DG EAC, DG Environment, DG Connect, DG Ener, DG Research. This means that this was a real collective endeavor. So the 6 factors are listed here. Very quickly, engage, as we said. It's very important that humankind should exploit the win-win partnership between culture and climate action. Assess, there are several tools, guidelines, instruments available, but are they efficient? Can they be used from local tools, can be scaled up and used at a European level? And this was one of the questions. Then transform, we assessed, we found several good practices ongoing. So this is a testimony that the sector is doing their homework, but also the fact that there is a need to stimulate, so to set up policies to help the sector to enable this transformation. And then also we identified a very important element, the one of amplification. How can we cooperate and learn from each other? And this is one of the events which is really, really important for that. And finally, how to advocate. So how to bring the voice of the cultural sector into the big top discourse on climate policy, because we all know that it's not being sufficiently recognized until now. And I have to say that the NEP is doing a lot of work in this direction. First message was said already. Well, the ecological transition is not just a technological endeavor, it's mainly a cultural endeavor. This must be really understood. It was the motto of the group since the very first day. Because the sector has its own responsibility, the sector produces from 1 to 3% of the impact that it's produced by total industrial environment, and so we need to take action. Intrinsically, the sector produces several uses materials. It's heavily, the activities are heavily impacted by the transport issues, mobility issues, and so on. And we know that this has consequences. But at the same time, the cultural load, well, we can go beyond the simple reduction of our impact or mitigation or the adaptation, because we could also, the culture can produce a change in society. And this is demonstrated by the commitment of several artists. Well, I've just a couple of examples here, Lorenzo Queen or Bansky, who are really committed to bring this message to society and produce the behavioral change that is needed to address such a huge issue. We have identified several good practices and lessons learned. So let's say the sector is really working. Places, transforming places. One example is the Valletta Design Center in Malta, with the venue, the venue where the cultural operator work has been totally transformed, green roofs, and new system to reduce the environmental impact. but also transformation of practices. And this is another example, Collective in France, which is standardizing, for instance, the opera. In the opera, you know that opera, unfortunately, generates a lot of waste of material, and so standardization that helps the sector to use and reuse the materials for the performances. But also policies that should enable, and one element important was, for instance, was clear with the sustainability ladder. It's an interesting example in the Netherlands. You should not do everything at once. There is a graduality, a step-by-step approach that can be adopted by the sector. And also several tools like, for instance, eco-labels or also eco-conditionalities issues. And an important example was brought by the Austrian eco-label for cultural institutions. Quickly, we produce a recommendation. Of course, quickly, I will just highlight 3 elements. At higher level, we need really to be sure that culture is included in the global discourse and in particular considered a key element for sustainable development. This is, I say, the master of all the policy goals. We need to mobilize the cultural and creative sectors, and we have identified several ways, also even practical, pragmatic, for instance, green residencies. Artists is really learning from the environmental sector how to do it, and support, of course, the green transition by setting policies and concrete, providing support, regulation, and action. And finally, there is important to take into account that there are some preconditions needed using tested and trusted measures. There are several tools available, must be used, and also another important message is that funding is needed, but the cultural creativity are not supported adequately, even for their proper intrinsic work. So it's very difficult for them to carry on these changes without proper support coming from also other fundings. I stop now because we are many, so I want to just leave the space to the others.
Thank you so much, Arminia. I think you're pointing there at something here important, which is you have a sector that is probably convinced, that is like globally very much on board with the goals of the transition. What we have is lots of challenges for pathways, for how to actually making the jump into a different way of working. And I think Joris is perfect for talking about this. He's an expert in the performing arts and works with Perform Europe, which is a funding scheme for the performing arts sector. Usually, like, one of the first places, the first at which people point at to look at the environmental impact of the cultural sector is touring. It is the actual act of the performing arts requiring for people to move to see a performer or for productions to move from place to place. So probably this is one of the most studied spaces and the ones that have generated more ideas. Joris, thanks so much for being with us and actually give us kind of like the context of what is our current thinking about a model of transition for the actual act of touring and for the impact that the performing arts have in the environmental dimension today. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jose. And indeed, I will be talking about international touring in the performing arts, specifically also from the perspective then of Perform Europe, which is a funding scheme for supporting international touring projects, but aiming specifically at innovations, experiments with regards to greening the touring, but also social inclusion. Funded by the European Union, Creative Europe framework, but also managed by the leading European performing arts networks. And indeed, there are 2 priorities in Perform Europe in the open calls that we have. It's indeed fighting climate change, green transition, but also promoting inclusion and diversity. Here you see the figures of the projects that tackle specifically these priorities. In the 2nd edition of the call, which was just finished, it's nice to announce that a 3rd call has been announced and will be launched on the 23rd of June, so stay tuned for that. But now I will be sharing some insights from this 2nd edition of Perform Europe. Maybe before I show the image, just to show that we indeed had not only supported the project, but we also had a learning trajectory with representative from all the projects. So we really collected the learnings and the strategies from these 42 selected projects If you can scan the QR code, you can download all the materials and the practical hands-on tools that we have there. But maybe just to briefly make 2 points about the strategies of these 42 selected projects and what we can learn from them. We distilled a strategy framework from these projects, the experiments, and the question in this scheme, this visual, is really, if these projects want to go about making touring more inclusive and green, how do they actually do this? And we see 4 big impact zones, clusters of strategies, ecological strategies, how to make our touring greener and how to actively fight climate change via touring. That's the question there. Community strategies are about how do we engage in a sustainable way with communities and perspectives that are often not included, marginalized, repressed, excluded from practice. How do we do this in an artistic way? So what are specific artistic strategies to do this? And last, organizational strategies, very important and a big discussion. If we want to make an impact on society, the way we work, the values we promote via the work, fairness, solidarity, how can we put these central stage in our practice, a big thing. Just for the presentation's sake and for the debate's sake, I want to make 2 points, specifically first about the ecological strategies, and it resonates a lot with what you said. If you look at these strategies, reducing carbon footprint, carbon emission is one element, but it's not the only element. But it is important, and so we see it in the project in many ways, tracking the carbon footprint, circular use of resources, optimizing touring schedules, but also more transformative approaches towards touring concepts. For instance, when a small team is traveling, not the big casts, and projects are recreated in a local context with local artists, but also with NGOs, for instance, which also has a social and an ecological impact. So that is important, but it's also, as you said in your intro, about shifting the minds. 2 other strategies are really connecting the art with the activism. And we see a lot of these collaborations where artists are working together with NGOs, and for instance, also including performative strategies in protests and in the citizen movement. So these connections are very important there. And last also, we talk about raising awareness via, for instance, working together with schools, providing training for the artists and the teams, but specifically also in the performances themselves. Site-specific performances really help you to connect, for instance, in a different way with nature, with ecological issues, in a way that you just cannot do by reading an academic publication or in a school. So this is really where we touch on my second point. It's not about instrumentalization. It's really connected to the specific strength and strategies of the performing arts. The imaginaries, the new narratives, it's all there in the strategies with regards to the artistic. We make them by pooling diversity of perspectives, forms of knowledge, not only arts, academia, but also including these repressed voices, these marginalized voices, also including other than human actors. So really including these perspectives in a way that's not done often in academia, in political discourse. This is really a very specific strength, and it's a cultural and an artistic strength. So that's my main point for here. It's not about instrumentalization. It's not only about technical aspects of carbon footprint depression. It's really via the strengths of the performing arts that we can contribute to this broader shift. Yes, before I give the floor to the next speaker, I'll show the QR code just a little bit more if you want to dive deeper into it or download the tools. All right.
Thank you, Joris. Thank you so much. Yesterday, in the conversation we had about openness, Eva Kraus introduced an exhibition we transformed that was a perfect case study what we are discussing actually in this panel. So we're very happy to have Sven, who is the co-curator of the exhibition and a curator and cultural scientist working at the Bundeskunsthalle in Bonn. We transformed was an exhibition about the principles of the Bauhaus, from the cultural space of the Bauhaus, but also thinking how to actually reduce and be kind of like in a way adhere to those principles in exhibition making and exhibition production. Thank you so much for joining us today, and also expand more like this example and many other more about how exhibition making from design to shipping to everything can also be an active agent in this transition.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. I work for the Bundeskunsthalle, which is an exhibition center in the former capital of Germany. We have no own collection, so but we offer a wide-ranging program of art, science, cultural history, performing arts, talks, and also architecture. Maybe similar a little bit to Bossard. I would like to talk about footprint and handprint in the cultural institutions, because it's a very easy and also practical approach. And maybe we can start with the more practical part or technical part, because we are working also with a carbon footprint calculator. At the moment, it is no obligation, but we do it voluntarily. So in Germany, and I think also in other countries, there are already models you can use as a calculator, which helps you very much to be very precise how much energy you use, how much CO2 emissions do you produce, and so on. And then you can really have a very concrete basis to improve all these sections. I do not want to go into detail, but the interesting part is the pink one. And the pink part stands for the travels of the visitors. And that's a paradox, because all of us want to have more and more visitors, but on the same time, the visitors are the main problem regarding to the carbon footprint, because they come by train, they come by car, they come by plane, and probably this is also an issue for the festival, and we have really to think about mobility and mobility concepts in the context. That's why I personally prefer really to work with the concept with the handprint. You know that probably already. It's ongoing for the last 10 years, and in the end refers to the positive impact your work may have on change, on structures, on behavior, and attitudes, and so on. So I think in the cultural field, the most important approach is the handprint approach, much more than the footprint approach. What we have done in 2025 is this huge exhibition. I think it has been, until today, the biggest international exhibition on sustainable architecture in city development. We have presented overall 80 projects from all over Europe in different fields, and these different fields are also a kind of guiding principles. So we gave an overview what's going on at the moment in these different fields, also with the idea that there is not one and only approach, but we need a variety of approaches, and we have also to discuss these different approaches, because nobody knows exactly what will be sustainable in 5 or 10 years. But we have to work with clay, we have to rebuild, we have to reuse, we have to work on circularity and so on, and we have to do that all together at the same time. I have a few pictures. I do not want to go here too much into detail, so you can see there have been also artistic works in the field of biodiversity. There has been a lot of material. Of course, there have been also business models coming from designers and new materials. There has been a big chapter on reuse and rebuilding, also featuring some projects here in Brussels. And then we have had also a section about research and smart materials and so on. So I think it has been really a very good success for our institution, and I would like to share a few learnings, and maybe the most important is that there is a huge interest in the public in these topics. And the interesting thing is that a lot of visitors said at the end of the exhibition, okay, what a great exhibition, there are so many positive ideas, and I'm so happy to see them. And then is the crucial question, but why do we see so less of them in the everyday world? And this is, I think, the main question. Why don't we see more of this fantastic project in the everyday life? I think this is really important. That's why I come to our next project, and we come to politics. And I would like to invite you to a very first edition of our Bonn Summit, European Forum on Culture and Politics, where we would like to talk for 3 days about the current political developments, not only in Germany and in Europe, but also in the US, because as you know, there are at the moment a lot of anti-democratic, authoritarian movements, and they are also a threat not only to climate protection, but also to science, to arts, to non-governmental organizations. So one topic of the conference will be about shrinking civic spaces, and another topic will also be about the attacks on scientists and cultural activists and NGOs. So I think there are similar patterns you can see not only in Germany but also in other European countries, and we have really to discuss and to understand how these patterns work and what we can do against them. So it's really an invitation for exchange on an international level about culture and politics, and it's also an invitation for solidarization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sven. I think that just after the first round of presentations and your starting points, we already are in big agreement on one thing, which is that actually culture's role for shifting minds, for taking the perspective of the other, for actually kind of like expanding our understanding of the role that we are in the world is absolutely central. So I think we get like in a perfect journey to Estelle's work. She's an art historian, and in her work he focuses on the relationship between art and the living world, how the imaginaries of the living world are present in the center of art. And I guess that there's been in the last 15, 20 years a huge philosophical shift to start considering things from a more than human perspective, to put emphasis in the idea that we are not the protagonists of the story or the only voices in the story. So I'm very happy to end up this presentation with you and your work basically expanding this vision and also thinking how the arts from dance to other forms of it can expand the presence and the point of view of the non-human in this story. Thank you, Estelle.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. So yeah, as an art historian and as a writer, I often ask myself, why are arts relevant when it comes to tackling the ecological crisis? And it may seem, perhaps you have already an answer, but for me it's always a renewed question, because I don't think that the answer is that arts are relevant to raise ecological awareness or climate change awareness, because as an art historian it's always for me a bit uncomfortable, because I'm always afraid that arts are going to be instrumentalized, as Joris said, just as a tool to carry in an emotional way information, which is not my definition of art. So one answer I had to come up with to be able to carry out my practice as an art historian is thinking the ecological crisis we're facing today as a crisis of sensitivity to the living world. Of course, the ecological crisis is many things. It has many faces, tragically. It's a crisis of the living itself, but it's also a crisis of our relationships to the living world. It's a crisis of our economical, social, political relationships to the living world, but among these relationships, and it's one that is often unseen and left out, is a crisis of sensitivity to it. And what do I mean by that? It's two things. First, it's a limitation in range of all the experiences, emotions, perceptions, representations, imaginaries that are linking us to the living world. And as a very short example, I have like not a lot of time, but if I ask you to think about a train, a technical object that entered our lives a bit less than 200 years ago, I bet you have like tons of images that are coming to your mind, tons of lived experiences that are based on your daily life or on images you gathered from books and movies and series and all kinds of art practices. But then if I'm asking you to think about a roe deer, un chevreuil, de ré, then I'm gonna let you 3 seconds. I bet without knowing you that then it's more difficult. And the roe deer has been living with us in Europe. It's one of the most common animals in Europe, and it has been living with us for more than 500,000 years. So why? And it's because we inherit a culture that always, a Western European culture that always designated nature as a secondary subject compared to human affairs. And that's the second aspect of the crisis of sensitivity we're facing today, is that we are inheriting from not only a limited range of perception and emotions towards the living world, but also of toxic emotions and perceptions and representations of the living world. And if we look at the history of art, of the history of Western art, then we can see that oftentimes the living world is represented as a mere backdrop for human affairs. It's represented as inanimate, passive beings that are available to us to be converted in material or spiritual resources. And these are the foundation, the cultural foundations we are now standing on, and that we are now trying to build a new future, but we should be really aware of all the ghosts and all the heritage we are carrying with us when it comes to the relationship with art and the living world, because otherwise these ghosts are like enacting us in a way. And as we are thinking, we're reinventing our way of tackling the ecological crisis and of creating new relationship with the living world, if we're not aware of these ghosts, then we are reproducing the same toxic representation that contributed to the situation we're in today. So the role of arts and culture is also, that's something as an historian that I want to put forward, is also ambiguous, because Western art and culture has also contributed to this, to the poorness and to the lack of deep relationships that make us care for the living world. So yeah, we have to, there are many steps to walk. And why sensitivity matters. Some may say it's a very soft subject, it's not really serious, but sensitivity is so important because you only care about something when this something, this entity, this being, this landscape exists strongly in your inner world. If it doesn't exist in your inner world, if it's not a layered object charged with experiences, with art encounters, then suddenly when you see it outside, you don't pay attention to it. We only pay attention to what exists strongly in our inner world, and arts are the preferred way, I would say, or a very powerful way of making the living world enter the inner world of every individual. And arts, and that's why it matters so much, because sensitivity is a ladder to change the value scale that we have inherited, that is mostly toxic for now, but it's the only way that we can shift the quality of attention and the quality of the values that are linking us to the living world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Stel. We have a few minutes for a conversation, and I'm going to try to actually use them as much as possible so that we can throw as much of our concerns on the table. I'm going to start playing devil's advocate. I'm going to try to be here like a bit of the provocative voice, because it's all fine and good that we all agree that there is a transition that we have to do and that culture is a key agent for that transition. But that also feels a little bit of a cop-out if we don't change any of the way. It's very easy for us to keep on filling up narrative and discourse with a message and not translating it to practice at all. So for instance, you could say that the main problem that we could have now is that in practical terms, in Europe and in many other contexts, but since we are in this context in Europe and in Europe urban culture and in the way that we move, culture is operating mostly and on a big scale as a driver of a specific form of living. It is basically almost like an alibi for tourism industries that is kind of like depleting urban centers. It is kind of like producing an event culture that is based on making of culture an experience, and that requires a lot of effort, concentrating a lot of people in specific places in point and time. So can we actually make this transition without changing the fundamentals of what the cultural industries are today? How is the connection to experience, to the commodification of cities and the kind of consumption that we make of them, how low-cost, cheap flying creates like the perfect cases of opportunities for the festival weekend retreat, for the music tour, for the big exhibition tourism. And there is this contradiction within us, because in the end, we rely and we depend on these same forces that we want to change through message, but we don't seem to be able to change through a structural redefinition of what culture is about. This to me is the big elephant in the room. And I don't have an answer, and I don't think you have answers, but can you share our anxieties about this with us? Can we look at this thing in the eyes? And I'm happy for any of you to start, yeah.
Yeah, I can reflect on that, because what we've seen already in the different interventions is really, it's about responsibility, but we also need to talk about at what level can what responsibility be taken up. So it's not only about individual agency of me as a person working in the sector. Yeah. It's not only about the agency of a company going on tour or a museum doing interesting things. It's also about the broader context and ecosystems that we are operating in. And what we see in the performing arts, but also in other sectors, that the fight for the resources, the fragmentation of the resources, the short-term funding, the project funding, there's so many elements in the way we work, and we need to apply for funding, and also the broader context that make it very competitive. And that is exactly the reason why many people are going against the values that they actually want to promote in their work. And this is the real paradox. And for that to change, not only the actors in the fields should be responsibilized. We're here in a policy context, so we really need to think about the broader transformation of cultural policies that make this responsibility possible, that really create the conditions for slowing down in an overheated and accelerated system. This is what needs to be done. So we need to work on the different levels, and the policy level is very much important. And it starts also with responsibilizing and putting values at the front of the policies.
Anyone wants to? Yeah, I mean, I would guess like the big question here is how do we make a transition from culture being something special that happens in special occasions, in a specific point that requires a commitment, to a daily, everyday experience that is happening next to us, that is embedded in our in a way of living in which it is not an event, but a practice, a daily ritual, if you want, like a form of belonging to something bigger than you. Specifically, because you're saying we are also being asked, and in the same environment in which we are, to think about competitiveness, to think about impact, to think about, and Sven, you must be very familiar with this, visitor number metrics, all those kind of like optimization parameters that defines in the end whether a project is successful or not, whether an organization is successful or not, and how is it funded and why is it funded. How many of these constraints do you think enter into conflict with the general principles that we want to apply here?
Maybe I can answer. I like the picture of the ecosystem very much. And I would like to extend it also to other social institutions or organizations, because we're embedded in a complex world of also economic question, social question, political question, and so on. So I think from a cultural perspective, I think we should be very realistic in a double sense. In the first sense is that, as you have said, I'm completely convinced that the transition is a cultural transition. So it's really a change of our values, of our attitudes, of our consumption patterns, of our imaginations and everything. But this notion of culture is a broad notion of culture. So it's not only reduced to the arts. So the question is, okay, what can we contribute from a really artistic approach? But where should we also get in touch and in exchange with other parts of the broader ecosystems? So I think, from my perspective, the art institutions sometimes a little bit too much focused on their own perspective. So they have a very strong understanding, and that says, okay, we are the arts, we need freedom, we have to contribute. And I think we should, a little bit more self-reflective in that sense, that we need the other ones. To be honest, just an idea doesn't matter at all. you have to communicate the idea, you have to understand the idea, you have to adapt the idea, you have to repeat the idea. So talking about transition is talking about the long-run process, maybe of 5 years, of 10 years. And it's not just about having a good performance. So I think we have to think in this broader universe, in this broader context, and think, okay, what is exactly my particular role? And maybe that's a very small role, but in the end it's a very important role. But because for the ecosystem, all these roles and all the agencies are important.
Sorry, I'm a bit of a slow thinker, so I came up with an answer for your previous question.
Great.
But yeah, I was thinking that sometimes I feel that all the pressure we are putting today on the art sector of being like exemplary, of showing the way, ecologically speaking. I mean, I see the good intentions, but I'm also a bit worried because it reminds me of an idea from a German philosopher, Peter Bürger, who said that in the distinction we made historically between arts and society, the division we made and the role we gave to arts regarding to society, he said in the bourgeois society, because he was a Marxist philosopher, he said we're seeing arts as the refuge for values that are being exiled from society. The refuge of values that are being exiled from society, which means we want artists to like embody freedom because we are reducing freedom in society, but as long as they're doing it for us, that's fine. And it's a bit like this also regarding ecology, I feel, that sometimes we should be very aware of not pushing for ecological excellence in the arts as a way of like unburden ourselves with all the changes we have to do in society, as if we see it in the arts, then it's like somehow taking away the responsibility to do it somewhere else. So I feel it's very difficult to be an artist today, as Joris said, because you are in like double binds constantly. I see it with my art students in l'École des Beaux-Arts de Paris, who are very concerned about the ecological crisis, but are today also very frozen because they don't know anymore what to do, because it has every work they do, if they're tackling the living world, has to be perfect on every level, because otherwise they will be criticized for it. And I think it's we should, as you said, both of you said, we should spread out the responsibility and not expect artists to save us. This is not the role of artists, this is not the role of art.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sven, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, maybe coming back to your financial question. Maybe two observations. The first is, given that culture is so central for the complete transition, we have to ask ourselves why we are not able to convince those people with the money or the decision maker why we are important. So I think this is also a task for ourselves to communicate in a better sense and in a better way, and to offer what we have, because I think we have to offer a lot, but a lot of this is not really recognized or mentioned. So I think we have to be a little bit more offensive. And the second observation is that we are always discussing this problem of project funding. I would like to discuss this in the context of science, because it's not only limited to art, but also to science, to NGOs, to civil society projects, whatever. The problem is that project funding is very fragile, and all the people working on the basis of temporary finance projects are in a precarious situation. And this is also true for universities. And the problem, and I would like to pay really attention on that, is if we now in Germany or also in other countries do have extremist parties in government, the best possibility for them is to influence the project funding, because it's so easy to just change the aims and the targets of the funding system. So what we need is really to strengthen the basic finance of the institutions, of the universities, of the NGOs, and also of the art institutions. Because only if they are really financially independent, because they have their money day by day and month by month, independent of what they are doing, they are really free to do what they have to do. And if we continue to finance them on the basis of project, we are so fragile and we are so vulnerable, and we will be really in trouble if the political movement goes in the direction it goes in these days.
Arminia, I wanted you to. Great.
Same, really fully in line with what was said, but also from the point of view of the policy making perspective. First is, okay, we've been fighting in the latest 10, 15 years to give culture a role, give a cultural role, because with the financial crisis, we had to go and try to motivate ourselves to really find a role in our society. And then we started, yes, we have an impact on the economy, we have social impact, and so on. And all this narrative has been driven, I'd say we started around 10 years ago, from the narrative of innovation. Innovation, innovation, innovation. Absolutely. Innovation is the thing that produces all those changing, and this is the main, let's say, key products from the. But this is risky, because this kind of innovation, it is driven by a throwaway mentality. So we are at a dilemma. It was very, very clearly said. We forgot the sensitivity to the living world. So first of all, we need to rethink and to promote innovation, which is responsible, regenerative innovation. And this is rarely said in our documents. So we are in the middle of the dilemma. And the second, as a person who have been trying I've been involved through the G20, to the G7, the negotiation at COP, to speak with those who shape climate policy and convince them of the importance of including cultural considerations, as you said, because this is where it gives you also the access to the financing. The reply is also always that, call us when we have finished to fix the big issues. Yes, culture is important, but later. And we should say clearly, you won't fix it if we don't have culture on your side.
Absolutely. Thank you. One last question, because they're going to throw us out of this stage. Thank you so much for making this point. So the pandemic, and particularly the lockdown months, showed that we could change very fast and that could invent new ways of doing culture. And that we could actually reinvent the whole system, because culture was so essential for us that we had to do them with the way they had to do them. We're now in a moment where we're running out of cheap energy. We're running out of cheap shipping. Many of the fundamentals are changing. So what do you think we learned from those months, and what can we get back? I mean, how can we actually, in a way, learn from how we could do things fast and in new ways? And anyone who feels very strongly about it, please take it. Yeah.
I can immediately react to that.
Yeah.
Specifically also for performing arts perspective, this was really a catastrophe, because all the touring has stopped, and this was really a big economic impact on the daily lives of everybody involved. So that was really very, very bad and tough. And when you see things taking up again, you have seen also the acceleration has increased. So this is really problematic. But one thing to take along is that many people, artists, really reconnected to the local level, and really also got out of the bubble and looked for these connections in a local context, which is very interesting and relevant, because the diversity, the inspirations that you get for international touring, you can also get it in a very local context and look for new relationships in local contexts. And I think that is a shift that's actually also continuing, and that we take along some elements that are really integrated in the new working models that combine these local connections inside the arts, but also outside the arts, and using artistic strategies and context to create these connections. It's also integrated now in the touring system. So this is a concrete thing that we take along. And it should also, I think, as I already said, be valorized more in policies, because the policies are still very much output related, short term, project funding, and we need new policy frames that can really accommodate these slower practices that are also internationally distributed.
Well, thank you so much. This is it. We totally ran out of time. In spite of everything we have to change, it is really a privilege and an honor to be able to gather here and coming from France, from the Netherlands, from Germany, from Spain, and being able to together think about so many things and work in so many things that we share and that we need to keep on sharing. So culture as a meeting space and the space in which actually we can build up many ways of living together is still a very, very important thing. The festival continues. Thanks so much for joining us in this super intense and exciting session. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jose Luis and all panelists.